So, yeah, you've got 45 minutes to the next thing.
Okay, cool. Okay, well, everyone. Yeah, so first major update about Ethereum since last time. It actually exists now. So this was the picture of our science dashboard back in. Actually, this is from a few weeks ago, back at the beginning of October, just maybe 4 or 5 days after we launched. And I kind of like this picture because we've got nodes in literally every continent in the world except with the one that has penguins on it. So, does anyone here speak penguinese? Okay. It kind of shows how the protocol is all nice and global, everyone in the world working together, and those are values that hopefully we all like. So, since it's just been impressive just how quickly the community's grown, how quickly people have jumped on board. It's kind of almost immediately ballooned into this extremely quickly growing thing where the number of miners right now is about 100 times more than it were just 3 months ago. And this is, in some ways it's a turning point, I think, for the Ethereum project in a lot of ways. And to some extent, it's because before Ethereum launched, everything was just in theory. People were kind of developing dApps, but thinking about things, but there was nothing sort of actually happening in practice. And if you're kind of far away from the technology, I completely forgive you if you would think that if you thought it was probably not going to work. But now, it's actually live and it's great. Second important thing is that this is a start of another kind of big transition area that's, I think, just going to continue over the next few years, which is that for the first maybe 12 or 18 months, the Ethereum project, what was happening in Ethereum was mostly to a large extent, what was happening within the foundation. To a large extent, what was happening, was being built by our developers, things like the clients, plus some of all the sort of software documentation that we were building. But from now on, this project, Ethereum core has been built to the point where it works. There's still quite a long way to go, and we'll talk about the long way to go that we still have. But from this point on, the way that Ethereum is really going to get to the point where it is something that's actually used by the masses, people start building dApps. Steve Ballmer runs around screaming developers. Unfortunately, I don't like screaming, so I'm not going to do that. It's not I'll say the word developers 6 times to make it up. Developers. I just can't stress enough just how important everyone here, really everywhere in the world is in order to really, push this forward from just being a dream and now a piece of working code to something that actually does sort of fulfill this vision of this kind of, this sort of decentralized infrastructure for the internet. So, fortunately, people have stepped up to the challenge. And a month ago, this nice little list had around like 60 applications in it. This month, I think it's increased right now somewhere around 80 or 90. But the important thing is that increasingly, we got applications that are actually live now. So, we've got interesting stuff like prediction markets, blockchain explorers, a whole bunch of fair dice games. Some of which have very badly written random number generators. Don't know exactly how many people have seen this, but basically, someone tried to make a casino on Ethereum where they put the private seed that produces the random numbers into the contract. And as we all know, code on the blockchain is public, and so someone managed to hack it. So, one of the things I'm going to stress is that one of the foundation's sort of major missions going into the future is going to be education. And, we need education. So, we've got, this is a group Gnosis. It's a prediction market that was developed by, as I understand, by Consensys and was released last month. And they've got their first kind of trial market that's just doing a market on the Ethereum block difficulty. And what they have here is, people are betting on what the difficulty is going to be at block 180,000. And you can see, people are actually sort of buying and selling shares. Everything kind of works nicely. It was even giving, numbers that was roughly accurate until eventually, of course, over here, that nice little bug in the network happened and the block time started slowing down for a few days. And 8.5 trillion difficulty ended up winning. So, all these things are fairly simple, but, their demonstrations are showing this, this is something that actually, that actually works. And it's basically working exactly as we expected. So, aside from that, games, there's DAO wars, Ether Crawler, there's a bunch of other games. One of the little fun ideas I had was when we would eventually make the foundation into a DAO, we would make this kind of dungeon crawler game where there's this sort of one guy in a maze, and then we put board resolutions in sort of random points in the maze where like one would be say fire all the employees who's the SHA-256 of whose name is an odd number, or maybe triple people's salaries, or donate $1 million to proof of stake or whatever else. And people could send transactions to go northeast, south, or west, and it would all kind of process automatically. Hopefully we're not actually going to do that. Yeah. We can if we want. So, other cool dApps, Augur's got a crowd sale. They got up to $4.5 million right now. Yay, congrats Augur, you're as rich as the foundation is. Ether, one of these interesting stablecoin projects that's being developed at the moment. It's basically one of these price stabilized currencies, and I've always been impressed by their team, by the project, just because of sort of how elaborately they've been kind of carving out their vision. So they set up this concept of a maker TO, which is kind of insurance of last resort, and then they're building these price stabilized currencies on top of it. And it's still in progress, but it's come quite a long way over the past couple of months. Random number generation that actually works well. One of my pet peeves with some of these Ethereum lotteries is just the fact that the random number generators honestly still suck. And hopefully we'll make one that actually works well and kind of fix up that particular industry. Beyond the financial space, reputation systems. I've always been excited about this concept of reputation systems. This idea that you can, we've had reputation systems for many years. We've had, ratings on a bunch of different websites. We've got various forms of centralized recognition and so forth. And this reputation concept, this idea of reputation systems is that everyone has this kind of public ID, and people could, in some ways, register. Essentially register on different kinds of ratings, potentially proofs of transactions, like all sorts of information onto the blockchain. And you can actually see directly what any individual scores according to some metrics. So, if I trust a few particular people and those few particular people all think highly of one person, then I'm going to know I can trust them. And the idea is that you sort of put all this information up into the open and kind of basically aggregate everyone's opinions together and get as much information as possible about whether or not some particular person can be trusted. And there's many groups that are doing this right now. I honestly hear about a different one maybe once every couple of weeks. I know there's these kinds of things tends to be popular in the sort of Silicon Valley meetup community as well. It's all moving forward, and the thing I'm really excited for is actually seeing one of these go live and people start actually using it. So, the stuff that we've seen go live and get actually used right now, prediction markets, great. The nice thing about those kinds of applications is, you don't need anything except for just Ethereum as it already exists. And because of that, you can write your little 20-line contracts, publish them, and people can use them immediately. But other things are going to be slightly harder. So, for reputation systems to really work well, there's just a bit of extra infrastructure that has to be done. That might take a few more months to develop, but I think over the next year or so, we're really going to see it actually get there. Wallets. Thank you very much, Anthony and the Kryptokit team. They've done EthereumWallet.com, which, as I understand, we'll be talking quite a bit more about as well. EthereumWallet.org, I have no idea who that is, but they're there as well. EthereumWallet.com, as I understand, is an Electrum fork. MyEtherWallet.com. The name is a bit suboptimal. I don't know how many of you remember what the story was my Bitcoin back in 2011, but it's also there. It seems to work. Wallets that I'm excited about, MetaMask is this project that's kind of still in progress and under development. Basically, it's this kind of Ethereum dApp browser within a browser, so you can access like complete Ethereum dApp. So not just send Ether around, but actually use applications just from inside of a regular browser. Client and mobile clients, we're starting to work on that right now. There's like a bit of architecting that I think has already been done over the last couple of months, still in progress. So, where were we? And tools, yay! Embark, Truffle, Mix. If you're an Ethereum application developer, then you know about a lot of these. Python and C++ clients getting to 1.0. So, the exciting part about a lot of these is that Embark and Truffle, they're not even done by the foundation, they're just done by the community. And that's just, and it seems as though they're among the best tools we have for writing applications. So that's great, Yay. Lots of the community. So, the message, that's basically the real message that I wanted to get across here, that if you're at this point, the Ethereum project, before this, for the Ethereum project to really succeed, all this stuff has to get done too. But, a lot of the stuff has, to some extent, it's already been done. Everything that's in red is basically there. Everything that's in brown is, it's either there or it's like so close to 1.0 quality that it's going to be there within 1 week, and you might see announcements within the next month. Initially, when we released Frontier, we released it with a Go client only. I think at this point, all 3 clients have been running for about a month, and they've proven to be roughly as stable as each other. So, at this point, basically, you use whichever one you wish. If you like Python, go ahead and use Python. If you like C++, use that. JavaScript, also getting there. I think a lot of these Ethereum wallets are using some of the libraries. All this other software is getting there. Some of these purple things are a bit earlier stage, and some of them might take 1 to 3 years to get there. But we roughly know what the strategy is. But in general, the point is that still a lot of work to be done on the core. But at this point, the core has gotten to it's increasingly getting to the point where it's really more a matter of what people are going to build on top of it. And so, there's still light clients to be done. There's still a lot of infrastructure to be done. And ultimately, Ethereum right now, I think as I've said many times, Ethereum Foundation right now it serves developers. Ethereum platform gets nowhere if there aren't applications on it. And here we have. This is roughly what we want to do. We want to make it as simple as possible to build decentralized stuff. We want to make building decentralized stuff basically as easy as building a website, and hopefully even easier because you don't need to figure out how to set up your own server. So that's integrate Ethereum, IPFS, and Swarm, Whisper, everything else into one single package. Develop, test, deploy, universal browser, universal development environment. Make it as seamless as possible. And one of the focuses for the foundation going forward is education, developer resources, documentation. So if you're developing an application right now and you have a hard time, please tell us. We want input and we'd like to do the best that we can to help to try to work together to fix that. Now, Ethereum going forward into the future, is in part us continuing to work on this, in part everyone continuing to work on this, and in part people building things. And people building things is ultimately what I hope what I'd like to see the Ethereum community be about. It's great. We got wonderful decentralized tools and we can build great decentralized software. Let's do it. So, over the past couple of months, there's definitely a lot of reasons there's definitely a lot of things to be optimistic about. I've been talking to a lot of sort of some major banks, some other corporations, just people in general. There's, I think, a lot of increasing interest, both in Ethereum and also in this concept of blockchain technology generally. And I think people are increasingly getting to the point where they're understanding it, and that's a really great sign. As a year ago, these days, we get announcements every week that insert major banks here does some blockchain trial, or some major company does something. A year ago, that wasn't happening. A year ago, one of those got front page on just about every Reddit for 2 weeks, and now we've gotten to the point where it's completely commonplace. And I think we should all take a step back to appreciate just how far things have come. But there's still a way to go. And where we ultimately want to get to, I think, is this. Basically get to the point where the applications, tools, everything that we're building actually gets to the point where it doesn't just make things more decentralized and more censorship resistant. It even also makes things easier. And MIST is what we hope to be our contribution towards that. But at the same time, there is a lot more that needs to be done. So
what's the links there?
That's exactly what I did.
That's basically what's been happening right now, where we think the future is. Now, the other interesting thing is, just the specific thing, okay, I'm a developer, I want to build something. Well, what am I going to do? So that's the other question a lot of people are asking. The answer to, I would say the best answer is look at the things that you're interested in already. So, there's people right now that are building things like, apps for, say, storing personal information, or some people are looking into healthcare, or personal tracking. There's people looking into manufacturing and other things or whatever. And, what this community still needs is, sort of more dialogue, sort of more of an intersection between people who understand what the old world problems are and people who understand blockchain tech, who understand Ethereum, who understand blockchain technology, who understand what some of this other decentralized software is bringing, and work together to figure out exactly what value it can provide, and of course what value it can't provide. Because no particular software package is going to solve everything. So that over the course of the next few years, I think that I'm optimistic, and I hope that the space will continue to evolve in that direction. Aside from that, there are much more applications than just those 10 I showed that are on the pipeline. There's that list that actually has 80 of them, and there's at least 10 that are live, another 10 working prototypes, another 10 that are basic, another 10 have working demos, and so forth. And over time, those are going to continue to grow. I'm looking forward to seeing Augur launch and actually having prediction markets on everything. I think that could easily be one of the major applications. I'm looking forward to Augur launching, finally, getting dollars on the blockchain, and so that's, those are things that just need to be developed, or the things that are going to take time. Aside from that, technology, scalability, I would continue to sort of stress every couple of months about how important it is that I continue to stress a lot of these other sort of small pieces of the vision that we've sort of started to implement over the past 1.5 years. Originally when the Ethereum project started, all we actually had was just those top 3 things. We had Go, C++, it was just Jeff, Gab, and myself. All we had is Go, C++, and Python. And then over time, we just realized that this isn't just Bitcoin with Turing complete scripting. It's potentially this sort of foundation for a much larger ecosystem. And that's, there is just a lot more work that needs to be done in order to sort of bring things together. Another important piece is that not everything here has to be done by ourselves. So one of the projects that we're fairly close to and working with is IPFS. It's this basically kind of decentralized file storage, and right now they're targeting it as basically a way of storing files for websites. And decentralized files, decentralized applications, perfect fit. And if we can integrate that into Ethereum, then great. That's collaboration. Collaboration is what we want, and collaboration is good. Yay. Aside from that, we've user interfaces. I think one of the things that I'm really grateful from some of the leader people that joined our team is just how much focus we've started to put on that. Like, it sounds a bit silly to say, oh, we've watched with a command line client, but the fact is that we had to launch and we can't do everything. But now that we have launched, now is the time when we're starting to increasingly focus on a lot of these things. So, this is basically the story from a development standpoint. Then of course there's the question, if you're not a programmer, what are you going to do? And that's important. I think that, in the long term, if you're not a programmer, then, you can use this. And you can use applications, you can sort of trade events on prediction markets, and if you actually know who's going to win the 2016 presidential election right now, then great, you can make a lot of money. If, of course, Augur launches before Hillary Clinton wins, but we'll see. No, it's Donald Trump. Now, of course, aside from that, up until now, the ecosystem has been to a large extent about developers, and to a large extent it still is. But at the same time, there's just a lot of other things that there's much more to building an ecosystem than just development. If we're going to get to the point from just writing these kind of toy contracts that let people bet against each other to building applications that work for millions of people, there's figuring out how this is all going to integrate with sort of the real world, figuring out what the bridges are going to be, figuring out how to, figuring out how to get people on board, figuring out how to just continue to figure out how to make this stuff as easy as possible to use. All these things are just really important, and I just have to continue to stress them. Aside from that, there's also questions. Yes, there are any questions. If people have questions, we're happy to answer them too. Yes.
Yeah, I would just like to know why the foundation is going after other programming language for the core Ethereum. It seems that Go has overwhelming the market here, taken the market lion's share. So why are we spending resources on other code?
Right. So this is one of the things that's controversial even within our team to some extent. But the idea behind having multiple clients is that it just helps. To some degree makes the network more secure, to some degree prevents the Bitcoin situation. And the Bitcoin situation, just to recap, slightly, my perspective is basically that, like what you have is one client, and the entire, almost the entire world runs this one thing called Bitcoin Core. And Bitcoin, Bitcoin is theoretically this decentralized thing. It's controlled by a whole bunch of people, but Bitcoin Core is one specific software project that has only a few maintainers. And of course, it's gotten to the point where, you have a fairly small group of people essentially claiming that, or by being the lead developers of Bitcoin Core, essentially becoming a kind of de facto authority over Bitcoin. So, it's led to this kind of situation that's backwards in a lot of respects. And that was one of the things that I was always looking to avoid, basically try to create an ecosystem where the specification is the thing at the top and not one particular implementation. Another issue is that one of the really sort of technical points of Bitcoin that really annoyed me was, I don't know if anyone's ever tried to manually create a multi-sig transaction. As it turns out, Bitcoin Core had this one bug that forced you to put an extra zero at the start of every script. And that was not intended, completely stupid, but because Bitcoin Core had this one bug, Bitcoin Core was the only client, and it sort of ended up being a rule, and now we're stuck with it. And that was something I did not want to happen here. So, the three clients have actually helped a lot. They've helped. Most of the time when we find some kind of bug or some kind of vulnerability, it very often shows as a difference between how two different clients treat some particular transaction. And if that kind of blockchain is what happens while the network is live, then yes, it's a bit painful, but at the same time, it has really helped us sort of bring out all of these issues extremely quickly. The task of creating 4 perfectly compliant implementations of such a sort of complex virtual machine and piece of software is, it definitely isn't a small one, but just, to some degree, having these sort of different implementations checking each other has actually helped us, I think, move toward that much more quickly. But it definitely is a trade-off. The other thing is it definitely costs a lot more to maintain 3 clients than 1. Yes.
Yeah. Currently, what is the biggest limitation or misconception that people have that are trying to create dApps?
Let me think. There's a few. One thing that always has to be stressed is that everything inside of a dApp is public. Everything on the blockchain is public. Another misconception is that you have to use the blockchain for everything. So, sometimes people are saying, well, if you want to do a decentralized Reddit on Ethereum, does that mean that you have to put all the posts and all the images into the blockchain? Is that going to cost me $200 in order to make a post? And the answer is, well, if you do it stupidly, then yes. But if you don't do it stupidly, then the idea is that if something does not need to have every miner agree on it, then you probably shouldn't use the blockchain for it at all. You should use something like Whisper, or a Swarm IPFS or whatever else. Blockchains do very particular things and they do them well. So one of the things that blockchains do really well in a decentralized Reddit is, for example, just keeping track, maintaining a registry of what everyone's usernames are. Basically a kind of specialized DNS. And blockchains do that really well, and you probably should use a blockchain for that. One of the things that they do less well is storing images, and so you should probably store your image on IPFS. So that's something that I think really needs to be stressed. Another thing I suppose is just, it's one of the questions that people often get is okay, if you send this code to a contract, where exactly is the code run? And to some degree, that's one of those things that's kind of always conceptually hard to understand. Basically, it's run by every node of the network, and it's kind of the definition of a valid block that executes all the transactions correctly in sequence. Ideally, we'd like to get it to that point where people don't need to really sort of understand things that deeply, and people just understand that you have a contract, you send a transaction to it, and and then whatever code is supposed to run actually runs. Unfortunately, naming these objects on the blockchain contracts is, I've admitted this several times, I think right now it's a mistake because one of the common questions I often get from people is, well, okay, you have these contracts the blockchain, but what are these contracts? Is a contract like an agreement between two parties? And the original vision behind Ethereum, like way back in 2013, was that this was meant to be a kind of supercharged version of Mastercoin that let you have these smart contracts between two people that have like serendipity code inside of them. But since then, it's evolved into something that's very different in a lot of ways. And you should think of these contracts more as kind of being just objects that have code and that are controlled by code, almost like autonomous agents more than anything else. One of the other issues is this whole concept of, well, ether and gas, what are they? What two things are, how are those two different from each other? So, I mean, in general, the idea is that, a transaction has to specify a gas price, it has to specify some amount of gas, and it pays for and gas basically just means computational steps. And like, it's not something that can be traded, and you pay for the gas using ether. So that's one of the things that it's definitely, I think, helpful to have a solid understanding of. Another thing is that, once again, in terms of not doing everything on the blockchain, this, I keep on showing this, I keep on showing these really cool dApps inside of this. The interface, like the HTML, is designed on the blockchain, right? Right now it goes on a server, and eventually we want it to go onto Stormer IPFS. So those are probably some of the major points. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of smaller ones. Yes.
You mentioned that you talked with a bank. I understand the bank and Wall Street are quite interested in blockchain, but they often talk about the private or semi-private blockchain. Does a semi-private blockchain require a token, a cryptocurrency to function? Or
theoretically, no. So you need, so in public blockchain, you need tokens for two reasons. The first reason is to act as this kind of transaction, to prevent transaction spam. So you charge a fee for transactions, and by doing that, you sort of force a limit on how many transactions go into the network. The second reason is you need something to pay miners with. And if you're using proof of